Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the 10th of September, and joining me on this edition are Assistant Editor Steve Withers.
I think it was Blessed Are the Cheesemakers.
News Editor Mark Hodgkinson.
I had a lovely supper and all I said to my wife was that piece of halibut was good enough for Jehovah.
And Audio Reviewer Ed Selley.
Where's the fetus going to gestate? You're going to keep it in a box?
So welcome along to another weekly podcast here at AVForums, and it's been a busy week. We put the podcast out on Tuesday last week because myself and Steve jetted off to Berlin for IFA, and Mark was attached to the news wires.
Mark didn't jet off anywhere.
Mark never jets off anywhere.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark, but you know.
So was you for getting married and having kids.
Yeah.
So yes, it was IFA last week, and one of those shows, Steve, that it was just super busy, too much to see, too much to do, people pushing you out the way, especially with big tripods and cameras and all the rest of it. It was a battle, and it's about the same size as CES. It doesn't have as many exhibitors, but in terms of floor space, and a lot of that's white goods, but that's still kind of the size of it as well. This year, a little bit different. And I guess the way I found it, I thought there was quite a buoyant mood with everybody this time around, and a feel-good factor which I haven't seen since probably about 2008.
Yeah, I think that sort of feel-good factor seems to be seeping through most of the AV industry. I think the same could be said for CES when we were there back in January. That's in the sort of few years that I've been covering it with you, I've seen it go from post-crisis, bit in the doldrums, to really getting huge again and very buoyant. As it was in January, and the same with the IFA. I mean, I was at IFA last year, and I thought that was a very good show. Some interesting stuff was announced, which isn't always the case because obviously IFA sits, a few months before CES, and therefore the tendency for people just to sort of bring to market things they'd already announced at CES. But last year, I think there was some surprises and interesting stuff being announced, and this year again, it was a good feel-good factor all round. Some interesting products got launched, which we're about to talk about, and it was a good show. Obviously, it is an unusual show in the sense that it's the only ones really where the public are let in. Most of the other ones are trade shows that are only for trade professionals. Whereas after the first 2 days, where it's sort of the press and the trade people, they let in the general public, which makes sort of Fridays quite interesting when we're still there, and it gets a lot more crowded. But by the same token, you can also get something to eat because all the food stalls are then open. But it was a good show. I've enjoyed the last two. This is my third time, and certainly last year I thoroughly enjoyed it because there was some stuff that really appealed to me personally. And this year again, I thought it was a good fun show.
Appallingly dodgy. You just love the Karcher pressure washer stand, didn't you?
Yeah, I know. I'll tell you what, if you do go to the white goods areas, some of this kitchen equipment you can get now is so sophisticated. Yeah. You're like, blimey.
It's really cool, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting with the white goods stuff, and unfortunately we didn't really have an awful lot of time to go down and have a look at that. But one of the things I think I'm going to bring up before we get into the real sort of home cinema hardware is we did a stand tour with Philips, and we looked at stuff that is not core, is not what we're about, but we had a spare 10 minutes. The guy really wanted to show off his applications and stuff, and a lot of it does cross over with the demographic of people who use AVForums. There's a lot of young dads out there, a lot of young professionals and stuff, and one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life was Mr. Withers' face on a TV, and I'll put this in the thread, on a TV screen with a selection of moustaches and beards, Steve, and instructions on how to do it with a razor.
Yeah, there's Philips have got an app, which an app for an iPad or tablet generally, and there's a face shape on it, and you look into the camera and match your head to that face shape, and then it takes a picture of you basically, and then you can add things to it, moustaches, beards, and I have to say that I thought I looked quite nice with a decent beard. Well, unfortunately, the reality is far from that. In reality, my beard is ginger and patchy. But with this app, I can look like a Disney villain.
I'm going to put these photographs up in the thread, but the first one is very YMCA. It's just
were you rocking the Burt Reynolds?
He was indeed, and it's like we did what was the charity thing we did a few years ago? November, and let's just say that Steve will never have a moustache like that, because after a month it was just visible, and I've got no room to speak either, but
if only I could grow beards like that, would be great. But Unfortunately, that's not the case. But obviously, what it does is that the app shows you what you might look like, and obviously it gives you instructions on how to achieve that effect using one of the Philips beard trimmers. Other thing they had, which as a big coffee drinker, I did like the coffee maker. You know, it was a full-on coffee maker, you know, where they grind the beans in the machine, add hot water, you've got lattes and cappuccinos, and there's an app attached to that, so you can select different strengths, different mixes, different combinations. You can save them for yourself, so if your friend likes a particular type of blend and type of coffee, you can save that, and when he comes around, just press the favourite button for him, and it makes his coffee for him.
That sounds great and all, but had they got the preparation time to below that where I can no longer be bothered? I'm a fanatical coffee drinker. I love the stuff. But over the years, I've played about with various machines, both, you know, electrical and just mechanical. And I always just go back to a cafetiere. It is exactly the length of time I can be asked to wait for a cup of coffee.
I was watching how this machine worked, and the guy said, and it needs a bit of maintenance, and it tells you how to do the maintenance guide. And I'm thinking, no, that would just put me off straight away. The fact that you've got to keep this thing well maintained. It was almost a professional product, really, Steve, wasn't it? I mean, something that you would
on that, yeah. I mean, I use an espresso machine at home, which is pretty straightforward. You pop in your capsule, turn it on, and it takes. I mean, even Ed, you would probably find that was a convenient way to make coffee. Obviously, the difference is that. Well, the downside rather is that the capsules are about 30p a pop, so it's
also
not cheapest.
You can't make a coffee in sufficient volume and strength.
Well, no, you can make an Americano because you could do a couple of espressos and then add boiling water to it.
So in other words, I could spend 60p.
Yeah, for a really big, strong.
Do you mind if I don't? Again, I'll just go back.
Still cheaper to buy one in a coffee shop, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but still nowhere near as cheap as me just having. I get the Polish Delicatessen's got some cracking coffee in it at the moment. Really good.
Have you also factored in the amount of time you have to spend washing up your cafetiere afterwards?
Rinse it through, dishwasher, done.
Anyway,
right, moving on.
They had the
so there was something that would interest Ed here. So they had a baby monitor, so for young parents, and especially first-time young parents. There's always the nervousness when you put youngster away to bed and so on. And so this is a little baby monitor with a camera, and it looked really, really interesting the way that it worked with applications about the house. So you could, using your tablet, have a look at the camera. You could hear what was going on in the room. So you obviously could hear baby breathing. There was other things where you could invite the grandparents in to the application. There was a privacy button, so if you were changing nappies and that kind of thing, you can hit the privacy button so nobody else could see into the room. But if you wanted grandparents to have a look and so on, then there was a functionality for that. And while it didn't do it at the minute, there was also the functionality to add in is baby breathing technology. So stuff that would really, taken a real interest.
I can assure you, thankfully this isn't personal experience, but some friends of ours, they had one of the special sensors under the mattress, and they're just incredibly sensitive. So if your baby moves, there's enough of a pause where it no longer registers breathing for you to hit the levels of abject terror.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd take that with some trepidation.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously that technology is not in this thing at the minute, and certainly what they were saying was that they want to make it as foolproof as possible, as easy to use as possible. And I've got to say, I mean, really interesting technology, and it's interesting to see different ways that companies are thinking about using technology. The other interesting one was on the Toshiba stand, the way that they're using mirror technology with displays built within the mirrors, especially in the bathroom where you get up in the morning, you stand in front of the mirror, there's a pad that weighs you, it gives you your vital signs, it tells you what medication you're on, if you need to be taking your medication and that kind of thing. Really, really interesting stuff that a few years ago was sci-fi, basically, and nowadays you're getting to the point where certainly interior designers and high-end interiors will start to feature this kind of technology, not just in the home but also for business and stuff as well. So that was really quite interesting. One of the things was like a mirror where it had a display inside, Steve, but you could use that for point of sale and other things. So depending on which angle you looked at, it's a mirror. Other angle, it had a picture there floating in air, and in the dark it would look amazing, in a dark restaurant type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to use it at home as your TV, but certainly because of the reflectivity of the mirror itself.
Unless
obviously.
you like looking at yourself a lot.
Yeah, unless you're incredibly vain. But obviously in other environments like a restaurant or a point of sale for a store, I think very interesting technology. And you're right, some of the stuff in that area of the stand was very sci-fi. Like, I mean, you can just imagine yourself having a shave in the morning. It gives you all your vitals, your weight, whether you're gaining weight, losing weight. I mean, it will weigh you at the same time as you're standing there having a shave. All this kind of stuff. Very interesting, you realise that the future is a lot closer than we realise.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen things like this in the past before. Certainly at Syria, that's more where this technology, business to business, kind of gets shown more than at a trade show open to the public. But the mirror thing really that appealed to me. I thought, that's really useful technology, especially if. Like I say, you got to take medication, or you got to, I don't know, your blood sugar levels, that type of thing. If the screen can do it for you and tell you straight away when you get up, or before you go to bed or whatever, remind you what to do and so on. Yeah, I can see that catching on big style once it's affordable, and once it becomes, not an item that's in the high end area. I think it'd be quite popular. So that was interesting tech. We'll be back in a sec to look at the products that really got us excited. Let's crack on, Steve, with a announcement we didn't see coming. It did take us a little bit by surprise, certainly because of the price point that this product has come in at, and that's the Sony VPL VW300ES native 4K projector. It's come in at £5,500 according to the distributor in the UK. This really sort of set the cat amongst the pigeons, because we've just had news today as well that one of the main competitors to Sony, JVC, are staying with this year's models into next year, so they're not renewing their model lineup, which they normally do in November. So very interesting, and something that's going to shake up the market.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, last year at IFA, they launched the VW500, which at about £8,500 was half the price of the VW1000, which was Sony's first native 4K projector. And that was like, well, how did they manage to hit that price point? Now going from 8.5 to around 5.5, I think I saw it online today for 5,800. That's not more than you would have paid 2 or 3 years ago for a decent Full HD.
Well, a VW80, VW90, that was the price point for that.
Yeah, exactly. So we're talking about we're talking about native 4K projectors that you can now get for a price point around about where you would have paid for a decent Full HD projector only a few years ago. So that's a major tipping point now. I mean, I think 5,800, a little bit high still. I think if they could have got it below £5,000, say 4,999, that would have been a big tipping point as far as people going into 4K projection are concerned. Certainly, be a kind of price point that would tempt me.
Give it 6 months.
Exactly. Yeah, it will. It will obviously go down to below that point fairly soon, I would have thought. But what it does mean is that, in terms of the projector market at the moment, Sony are really positioning themselves strong. I mean, in terms of 4K projection, they're the only game in town, and they've got 3 models currently available, and nobody else has even got one. And you've just made a quick reference to JVC there. Well, you could argue you can't blame if they haven't got the money to compete in terms of the innovation development.
You've got to look at the volume, and the volume is definitely with Sony when it comes to this kind of
Sony
thing.
obviously leveraged off the fact that they make cinema projectors. They've been doing it for a decade. They also make 4K cameras. They make, they own a studio. They have 4K production facilities. They make 4K TVs. I mean, they are seriously setting themselves up to be the go-to manufacturer when it comes to 4K.
But the thing is, everything you've listed there, JVC have exactly the same. They have a professional unit. They make video cameras. They make 4K cameras. They've had 4K projection professional-wise for some time now, because it's been in the demo room for at least 4 to 5 years, the one that they've got in there. So everything you've said for Sony does apply to JVC, just on a different scale, I think.
Yeah, maybe JVC are taking a break this year so they can spend time developing something for the end of next year, perhaps. Maybe that's what they're.
I would like to think that is the case, because obviously when you're looking at the generations, we're still on this chassis that came out 4 years ago, if it's going to continue into next year. So it's going to be a 4-year-old chassis by the time, hopefully they replace it next November, if they stick to their old release plans. And obviously the X35 has left the market, and there's no replacement, certainly from JVC coming in. They haven't announced anything. So all they've announced is that the X500, X700 and X900 will remain relevant models until next year. So that's all we've got from them.
It'll be tough for them though, because I mean, they're going to have the 700 going directly up against the VW500, and obviously now they've got the 500 going directly up against the VW300. All very similar price points. So it's going to be a tough year. I mean, you know.
But if you were buying a projector, Steve, would you buy one right now?
Don't know. I mean, I'd be more inclined to wait, because we're not far away from laser projectors becoming a realistic home cinema, viable home cinema option. And the big problem with any projector is if it's based upon a bulb, it dims and you have to replace them. And so that, you know, I know from talking to people behind the scenes, people are working on laser projectors, laser hybrids, LED, and those kind of alternatives where you don't have dimming and you have much longer life.
So would you buy a 1080p laser or a 4K
no,
Sony?
Oh, definitely. I think I'd wait for a 4K laser. I mean, at the moment, there's not much in the way of 4K content, right? So, you know,
which was my next question. You know, this is where I was trying to take this, because at the minute, like we all know, there is no standardized. We're going to come on to this as well, your favourite subject. So let's not raise it at the minute, Steve. Let's keep it under wraps till a little bit later on. But there is a lack of content until there's a standardised system. We don't know if the current models are going to work with that standardised system. You would hope that Sony are future-proofing and making it so people could upgrade, because it would be a nice little side earner for them to charge you a couple of £100 to make your projector suitable to take any feeds that may come out in the future. But I'm with you on this. I think there's too many things happening, and at the moment there's not a lot of commitment from in the home cinema market from stalwarts that have been there a very long time, and I'm thinking Panasonic. Not interested in the home cinema market, yet their professional side is seemingly booming. They're doing great business on the professional side. Not interested in the home cinema market at the moment. Sanyo, well, they were bought up by Panasonic, so you're not going to see anything from them. Optoma are certainly looking at sort of $3,000 and under market, DLP. No announcement of any 4K thing. Sim2, we've heard nothing. We might hear something this week at CEDIA, but certainly from the top end of the market, there doesn't seem to be a 4K solution at the minute. So the only game in town, as you have said, I mean, JVC do their eShift, which is good for what it is, and you put a native 4K signal, and that's a native as in what it'll accept at the minute, which is 709, D65, 420, and it'll take it, and it'll show it, and it's good enough. But like you say, the only show in town is Sony with their projectors, and are they future-proofed enough? That would be my only question. And would I buy it at the minute? No, I wouldn't.
It's interesting that, you know, because of the reasons you just listed, because basically the other manufacturers are really not doing much in the projector space at the moment. Sony, by virtue of the fact that it's put you know, quite a lot of really high quality projectors in the marketplace. So you look at the full HD, they've got the 50 and the 40, you know, really competitive price points, great projectors. Now they've got 3 different 4K projectors at varying price points as well. And again, one it's only in the 5,000, 6,000 price point. You know, they've gone for market share. I think they told us for 3% 3 years ago to 40% now. You know, the way things are going, they're going to be the only game left in town.
Yeah, I don't think it's as bad as that. I just think, obviously, we're talking about tipping points, and I think for manufacturers, and probably Ed will back me up on this because having worked for a manufacturer in the past, they're obviously looking for costs to come down on their side of things. So wherever they're sourcing their chassis from, and there's usually only 1 or 2 companies that build the chassis. So they're going to be looking at that. They're going to be looking at parts. They're going to be looking at how they can put their spin on things, and it's probably at the point in the market where it's just not viable at the minute for them to do anything with it. And that's probably why, I mean, we're speculating on this and we've got no inside information, but that's probably why JVC have you know, extended the life of the product line that they have, because they're maybe still looking for a solution that fits with their roadmap, which has always been black levels and so on. Maybe they can't find a fix at the minute.
I mean, one thing I can say for the VW300, because we both had a demo of it, it was bloody good. I thought the performance was fantastic. And asking them how do they, you know, get down to the price point from a VW500, it didn't sound like they'd chopped a lot out. I mean, basically, the thing it hasn't got is a dynamic iris, which frankly I probably wouldn't have used anyway. And the other thing it doesn't have is a lens memory feature, which, depending on whether you've got a 16:9 or a 2.35:1 screen, is not necessarily a big deal or not. Otherwise, then it's slightly less bright, so it's 1500 instead of 1700 lumens. But again, in a calibrated mode, that's not going to make a massive difference. So, you're not losing a lot. It's exactly the same chassis, exactly the same optics, same panel, and same processing. So, you're kind of thinking like for 5,800, that's a pretty good deal.
It is. It is. And if you want to get into 4K now, that is the most cost-effective way to do it. And I don't think it impacts too much on the black levels of that projector.
No,
the only way you really notice there was a difference if you had it side by side with one with a dynamic iris or a JVC, because that's still the strong point for the JVC. Still that end. But in terms of watchability, and we were in a completely blacked out room, just so people understand how the demo worked. It was a completely blacked out room, so a complete bat cave. It was, I think, a 9-foot or a 10-foot screen, and we were sitting 5 feet back.
5 feet back, we weren't far from it. No.
Yeah, so it was quite
and
a small.
You could see no pixel structure at all.
Yeah, it was quite a small room. So, what it would look like at 7-8 feet, I don't know, because there was no way of getting that far back in that room. But in terms of demos, it was really nice. It was with native 4K material. It looked nice and detailed.
Shot at the World Cup, and it looked stunning.
Yeah, looked good.
I was very impressed. I mean, there's a lot of fast movement in there, and the motion handling looked good. As you say, the native blacks looked impressive to me. The colours very natural. I thought it was a very impressive performance, and I wasn't comparing it directly with the VW500, but having reviewed that previously, I certainly couldn't see anywhere where it showed any obvious weaknesses. So I mean, again, Sony have surprised us for the second year in a row, really, as far as 4K projection goes.
Yeah, and in terms of what Thomas was saying, I think he's bang on the money. Thomas Iso, who was the product manager, what he was saying was it's basically a 500, but without the dynamic iris and with the iris fully open. So if you go and see the 500 and you want to know what it looks like, the 300 looks like, open the iris up, and there you go. That's what it looks like. Maybe just a little bit dimmer. Right then, let's move on to TVs. Panasonic. Let's move to them because we've been waiting since March for the AX900 when it was announced at their convention in Amsterdam. So it's now available. It has what looks like really interesting technology in the backlight. So it has local dimming, but their local dimming is local dimming. Local dimming, if that makes sense.
Local people.
Yes. So what they've done is they've looked at the way that local dimming works in a pixel by pixel basis. It's usually, I think they described it's usually as a 3x3, and they're doing it as a 5x5. So you get rid of the halo effect, which has always been the Achilles heel of a direct LED backlight on a TV. When you get a black screen and something bright, there's always a halo somewhere around there. So this technology, it's there to defeat that. They've also got technology in there which helps with color gradation and color points, so making it nice and accurate. They kept saying reference monitor and kept going on about broadcast quality. So they've put an awful lot of technology into this TV, and I've got to say, Steve, it's the usual on a show floor. It's very, very difficult to see what's going on because it's all footage that's been shot by them. So it's quite static shots of nice women in swimming pools and flowers and that kind of thing. But it did look impressive in the side-by-side demos. It
did look impressive. You're right, the footage they were using was a repeating loop of some footage they shot in 4K at a Barcelona match. And it looked great on the 900, but then again, it looked pretty good on some of the other TVs too. TVs that we've already reviewed, so you never can tell at a show floor. But certainly the technology inside sounded very interesting. We should be getting review samples in pretty soon, so I think it'll be interesting to see how it actually does perform. In a more controlled environment.
And did you get any whisper of price?
But it's not going to be cheap, is it?
It's not going to be.
Well, if you look at, I think if you look at the ZT entry price, I think it's going to be around that to be honest.
Higher, I
About
think.
£4,000.
Yeah, about at least that. I think the positive thing as well is that obviously someone made a mistake with the X800 and not having Netflix on board, and a few fingers being pointed at each other. But they've sorted that out, so Netflix will be on the AX900, and it's going to be available as a firmware upgrade for those who have bought the AX800. So you will be able to get Netflix 4K and Amazon's 4K streaming system. So there you go. You're going to get some 4K content on these TVs. Interesting as well that they have kind of backed off a little bit, Steve, in terms of we're going to better plasma, which was definitely the buzz at CES. They were still using that at the convention, but they seem to have mellowed out a little bit on those claims, certainly at IFA.
It's sobered up.
But then again, you got to look at what they're actually doing with the TV, and it is quite interesting that the plasma engineers, the guys that have worked on making plasma technology really good, have taken on an LCD LED TV, and have thought, right, well, how do we make this the best that it possibly can be? If you believe the PR spin that Panasonic are putting on this, obviously, but we'll take them at face value until we get a chance to actually see the TVs and test them ourselves. But I think from that point of view, it's going to be really interesting to see, right, okay, well, these are the engineers that worked originally on the Pioneer TVs. They've worked on the Panasonic plasmas. They're now turning their attention to LED LCD. They want to make it the best possible picture because that's what they're known for. I can see us fighting over who's going to review this.
True.
Are you sure they're not just slipped a plasma inside it? That's what the engineers have done.
Well, that'd be fine, because it'd be a 4K plasma mark, which we've been told is impossible, and that's obviously why they got rid of plasma when they did, because there was no upgrade path for the technology, not at reasonable prices. So it's going to be interesting to see that. That's coming in for review very soon. One thing that did catch everybody by surprise, and for once a company at IFA managed to keep the secret, and none of the countries out with Europe gave away the surprise this year, and it was quite a nice surprise if you're into audio and you've been into the hobby as long as we have on this podcast, and that was the relaunch of the Technics brand. Wasn't expected, and they've come in with a reference system and a slightly less reference system. Reference system starting at £40,000, which it's actually €40,000, so whatever that calculates at for the UK,
about 32 grand.
And the smaller system is about €4,000, so that's going to be about 3,000 something pounds if it applies that way, if it's a straight conversion. So we were both there, me and Steve, for the launch. We then had an after show party, which was later in the evening, where they had a jazz band, and then we had the full unveiling of the products. They also had the history products there, so everything from the first product all the way through to the last product that they made in 2008 when they pulled from the market. Now, it was all done really professionally. It was a great unveiling. They did everything right. The problem for me with this whole thing, and I'll put my hands up and say I do like the Technics brand. I think it's a strong brand, and certainly coming from a DJing background as well, I used the kit for years and it never let me down, and it was always well built and all the rest of it. The problem for me is that in the run up to Technics disappearing, it became a budget brand. And the brand became famous because of the DJing side of things, because of the turntables, because of the slip mats, because of the baseball caps and the t-shirts and all the merchandising that went along with that. And unless you, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, but unless you grew up in the 70s and 80s when Technics were producing quality hi-fi and were making world firsts in terms of speaker technology and amplification technology and so on, I think the problem here is that they're going to have a small market and a small Asian market if they're going for the reference system.
Well, yes and no. I don't disagree with anything that you've said, except that then, just to add a layer of complexity to this, there's a couple of things to take into account. One, if you were going to relaunch a brand which had seen a bit of a kicking in terms of how it had been used in the latter years of its life, you'd need a Halo product, and this is exactly what they've done. And two, because of the nature of the fact that most of the cheapy latter years Technics stuff has actually just expired and is now in landfill, the stuff that survives is actually the older gear. You know, the SP10 turntables, which have nothing, very clear on this, nothing to do with the DJ stuff at all. They're just a 2-speed direct drive. They're in, essentially, unless you drop it out of an upstairs window, they're immortal. So they're still around in fairly significant quantities. So I think that Technics the Panasonic have been quite clever here. I don't think, unless, well, I'm hoping for their own sake that they don't see significant sales potential in the flagship stuff. But it's a clear statement of intent. They're not just relaunching it and here's some everyday Me Too products. We're relaunching it and here's a no holds barred, balls out exercise in what we can do. And hopefully they will exist in small quantities. They'll take them to the shows that matter. If they can get a dealer or two on board and have them as demonstration stock, so much the better. And then from that point, you can then start to build the brand again.
Yep.
And I think the other thing that they've done, which is really brave, and I really, really hope it comes off, is the nature of how it's done. It's streamers, it's network audio, and essentially they are streaming preamps with then classic looking power amps, and then it must be said some slightly bizarre looking loudspeakers.
I mean, there's no doubt that there is a market for this, Ed. And
what's more,
big market,
it's been done with just the right level of boldness that I really hope it comes off for them.
Yeah. Because I think in terms of Japanese brands, I've always gotten this feeling that certainly UK hi-fi fans have been quite snobbish towards certain Japanese bands, but always seem to have had quite a soft spot for Technics, and to a certain extent Pioneer, but more the Technics brand. They seem to have that, and I think it's because of what they produced in the 70s and 80s. And when you look at the old products, the vintage products that they had there, they were years ahead of some people in terms of what they were doing with certainly speakers.
That, and the fact they also had a definite character. I think it was inevitable but reassuring that obviously the absolutely classic twin VU meter layout on the power amps has been retained. It would have been commercial suicide to do anything else. That's, along with, as you say, the 1210, the 1200. It's just one of the iconic Technics images. And let's face it, you and I both know that VU meters on any domestic amplifiers, it's decorative. There's pretty much, there's no real accuracy or benefit to them. It's just there to look cool. Yep. But bloody hell, it looks cool.
Yeah. Oh, I've got to say that the equipment looked beautiful, Ed. I mean, when you get a chance to see it, it is beautifully made. I mean, it should be for the price, but yeah, even the small system, Steve, wasn't it? It was really well constructed. Build quality looked absolutely superb. I mean, these were samples, but you've got to give them benefit of the doubt that the end products will be the same. And certainly in the listening sessions, the big system sounded really good. The small system, I thought, sounded too new, if that makes sense. It was like they'd just gotten it out of the box and set it up, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I don't know if those were the finished products or whether we were getting some sort of pre-production samples there. The big system did sound good. Whether it sounded 35 grand's worth of good, I'm not so sure. The 3,000, 4,000 quid system definitely sounded good as well, but I felt like it was just lacking a little bit, and it felt a little bit clinical and a bit compressed, I think was the word you used at the time, and you're probably right. It just didn't. It lacked impact.
But like TV, Steve, I'm not going to draw conclusions on a show floor in a demo room. I don't think that's fair on the product to do that.
Also, then we don't even know what they were actually using as a source either in terms of the files.
And the other thing was, I mean, the branding was rediscover music. Well, I discovered music I'd never freaking heard of.
There's always a saying, though, isn't it, of these things? Why don't they play music we're familiar with? It's always stuff I've never heard of.
Well, this is, ultimately timidity is the order of the day. There are occasional companies which are brave about this, but I don't know. There would have been a lot of people watching, and regrettably, there are large swathes of the fraternity who are just
pre-programmed to be upset if listening levels are above kitten's breath, and it's anything other than Woman with Guitar version 987. It's just
we were about 4 tracks in before we got a vocal.
Wow.
So yeah, not going to draw any conclusions. It's nice to see Technics back again, and brave on Panasonic to relaunch it. But I think there's enough love there, Ed, for it to do well.
You say brave. Panasonic would have been taking one look at how. I mean, obviously, in run. I don't know if you actually got time to go there, but I mean, obviously, as you know, in the run-up to IFA, Yamaha were announcing a monster clutch of new stereo products. Sony has been doing rather nicely with its own take on network audio, and Marantz and Denon in their sort of partnership exercises have been doing great things.
Yeah, but we're going to move on to another product, which another company who are trying to relaunch their products, and the thing that surprised me was that on these stands there were turntables. There were actually turntables on show.
Yeah,
which I haven't seen. I haven't seen that in years, and we're talking major brands. You know, you're not talking your hi-fi brands. You're talking major brands. So obviously somebody's noticed that vinyl's doing quite well at the minute, and I mean, I think it's a given that CES you're going to see the rebirth of the SL 1200. Turntable from Technics. It's a given. They can't come back and not do the turntable, you know what I mean? And I'll be first in line for one to go on my shelf and never be used, but beautiful thing to look at. Let's move on then, and we'll come back to this, Ed, in future weeks, so I'm sure we'll get right into the whole hi-fi rebirth and vinyl thing, because that really did take me by surprise. I don't know if it did you, Steve, but I even saw the all-in-one system, which I haven't seen since the late 80s, which is like your tuner. The only thing missing was the cassette deck. It had everything, the turntable and right. So another company trying to certainly relaunch themselves in the UK. They, for some reason, been very difficult to buy their products for the last few years, and that's Philips and their TVs. Steve, you spent some time on their stand looking at what they had to offer. You also went to the press conference. So I believe there's some news there in terms of where they're going to sell their product.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly fair to say that over the last few years when we've been reviewing Philips TVs, one of the most frequently asked questions on the threads has been, it sounds great, but where can I buy it? And that certainly has been the case. But they've been working very hard in the last year to expand the retailers that they're working with, and they're now being sold in Argos, Richer Sounds, John Lewis, pretty much every retailer, I think, apart from PC World, Coe's PC World at the moment. So, in sense of, if you want to buy a Philips, you should be able to find them now very easily in the stores, in any of the kind of places you would normally look, which is good news. I mean, the company itself, which is obviously now 100% owned by the TV part of Philips, is now 100% owned by TP Vision. It went through a period where it almost disappeared in the UK. I mean, it's still very strong in other parts of Europe. In the Nordic countries in particular, it's like top 2. Maybe even in first in some markets. But in the UK, it really had dropped down. And they've spent the last couple of years rebuilding that brand quite significantly. And I think this year it's really starting to pay off in terms of both the retailers that stock their stuff, but also their product range. So they now have, by the end of this year, they'll have 13 different UHD 4K TVs across 6 different ranges, as well as a vast range of full HD TVs as well. And they're introducing some fairly cutting edge stuff in terms of they've got an Android smart TV platform now and then on the high end TVs, which they gave me a demonstration of, and it was very good. It's very slick. It's like the kind of thing you're used to from an Android tablet or phone. That kind of that kind of functionality and intuitive navigation and sort of slick, fast navigation through the pages, that kind of stuff. It's very much like that, but on a TV. And obviously, any of the apps you get from Google Play Store will be the ones that are available for the TV version will be optimized for television use. So.
Well, I mean, Philips TVs have certainly, the smart TV has definitely been well known for gentlemen's content. I take it that's still going to be...
That's still there, yes. Also, you need to check that kind of thing when you're reviewing, because you want to make sure everything works properly.
Now, does that refer to the TV or you?
Yeah. So again, I think if you're of a certain vintage, just like Technics, you will have owned, or certainly somebody will have owned a Philips TV. Now, we're making a big thing of that on the stand, weren't they, Steve? They had the whole TV history from the old CRT days through to the first sort of flat-panelled CRTs, and then plasmas, and then so really making a big push on the fact that, hey, we're Philips and you remember us because you've had our products in the past, and hey, look at our new products. And it certainly worked, didn't it? So
yeah, it did. My first my 32-inch widescreen CRT TV, which I bought in 1995 for the princely sum of about £3,500, was a Philips. So yeah, I had a Philips TV for quite a long time. 32 inches seemed really big back then. Now it's ludicrously small, isn't it?
I bet it weighed a ton.
Oh, it was the size of a coffin. It was huge. It was. Yeah,
I'm glad I wasn't in the TV reviewing game when it was CRTs, because
I couldn't do it. I don't think I could do
it. Yeah, totally. Right, so let's move on quickly, because we're so on topic this week. It's unbelievable, and we're running fast out of time. Philips launching lots of UHD TVs. Lots of UHD TVs coming from everybody. It's going to be the case of, give it a few years, it's going to be harder and harder finding a 1080p TV. It's certainly starting to get to that point now where they're starting to flood the market. But again, we're coming back to the whole content. Where is the content going to come from? And it's interesting that Philips had a device, Samsung have a device, and Sony are also promising for their customers UHD content, Steve.
That's right, Phil. Going back to the VW300, I think people who buy early, put orders in early for this projector will find, in the UK at least, that they'll also be getting Sony's media player included with it for free. Now, I should probably make this clear that currently the one that's on sale in the UK doesn't include access to video limited 4K footage that you can currently get in the States, or come preloaded with any movies. That's down to rights issues in Europe for the studios themselves, but they do hope to add that at some point in the future. Samsung are launching their UHD media drive, I think in this month, or towards the end of this month, and that will come preloaded with 40 4K movies on it, so that's good news. And Philips had one of their own, which was a way of basically them adding Netflix 4K to their TVs without having to have it built in the TV itself, which is an interesting sort of approach. But that won't be available actually till the beginning of next year. But what you are seeing is the various manufacturers trying to find ways of delivering 4K content to consumers in a marketplace where currently there isn't much about. You can't just rely on Netflix, because obviously, for one thing, you need to have a high enough broadband connection to actually enjoy it. So finding other ways of delivering content, be it by providing it on a hard drive or whatever, does make sense. And all the major players seem to be now doing that in one way or another. Okay,
so that's what some of the content 4K wise and what some of the companies are going to launch. We're going to take a quick breather, and when we come back, the champagne's going to come out. Welcome back to the last part of our IFA special podcast, and the champagne, certainly in Mr. Wither's case, has been popped, and he has been talked down from the ledge by Ed. He's not going to jump anymore. Rather quietly at IFA, but it was done. The BDA have confirmed that the 4K Blu-ray specs have been finalised. Steve?
Yes.
Do you have a comment?
They will have the specs finalised and delivered to manufacturers by the summer of next year, with the intention the manufacturers can have players in the shops by Christmas of next year, which is wonderful news. It means it looks like we are going to get a 4K Blu-ray format. The big question, of course, is there's all one good having the hardware. Is there going to be enough software? In other words, are the studios going to support it? And that's the thing we don't know about yet. But at least we know that the hardware itself is coming. And that's not a surprise, really, because we've known for some time that it's pretty much been agreed now. 100 gigabyte 4-layer discs, HEVC encoding. The question is going to be how supportive the studios are going to be. And I have to say, talking to certain people like Joe Kane, for example, who we met at the show, courtesy of Samsung, he seemed quite optimistic about there being studio support for it. He said, he felt that the studios felt that they kind of got caught with their trousers down a bit when it came to high definition content on disc, as opposed to DVD, which has been a roaring success. And they're determined not to have the same thing happen this time around. So let's hope that is the case, and it isn't the case of that by the time these things hit the stores in December 2015, we're all streaming away quite merrily, and no one cares anymore.
Yeah, well, like we said last week, I haven't bought a Blu-ray in over a year, so this is going to be the big question. What studio support are they going to get, and is it going to be viable, and are people prepared to pay the price for it? Because if you remember when Blu-ray first came out, we were looking at £25 a disc.
You'd have to expect that again, wouldn't you, as well? Because
Totally.
there's no point in them.
It's such a niche. It's such a niche that if they're going to do pressing these discs, that's not going to be cheap, because they're going to have to buy the equipment to do that. And it exists. So it was leaked a couple of years ago that this stuff exists and has been built and so on. So they have the replicators and stuff to make the discs, but it's not going to be cheap. And I think if it does come, it's going to be really niche, and you're looking at Laserdisc Mark II, I think, in terms of pricing and so on.
I'm afraid you're literally in timescales with this still being 15 months away from anything, but you are watching the speed of the old world.
Yep, totally.
And it's going to uncomfortably come into contact with the speed of the new. I mean, God only knows what progress the alternatives are going to make in that level of time. I mean, if they said we might have something good to go for CES, who knows? That's enough. But you're unfortunately at the level of timescale where it's interesting. I was reading the thread, the comments in the thread this morning, and there's a number of facets of the spec, and in turn the HDMI spec, which appears to be yet to be perfectly pinned down. If it takes as long as it does, there's just a sense that the spec will have to adapt to fit what is already in place and working fine for the mainstream, rather than dictating what the spec will actually be.
I think that part of the delay, and the reason it's taken so bloody long for this to develop and agreed, is because, and this is something else that Joe Kane touched upon when we met him, and that's that 4K isn't just an opportunity to have a high resolution format. 4K is an opportunity to take television to the next level, and if everyone's going to agree to do that, be it manufacturers and broadcasters and studios and everyone else involved, streamers, streaming content providers, whoever it is involved, do we want to go to a wider color space? Do we want to go to higher bit rates? Do we want to, these are the kind of things that can and should be done, I think, to make, because we are still effectively using a system that was designed for CRTs in the 50s.
I think the problem there as well is that we've had this recommendation 2020, which people have gotten hold of and think that this is going to be the holy grail, and it's going to be A, quite difficult to get there, and B, makes no sense, because what you're looking for is the production side of things, the production world, to be behind whatever standard you go for. You want some future proofing in there, but you want something where you're going to have content to watch, and I think this has been one of the biggest red herrings ever, this recommendation 2020, and it's a sideshow, which again, and Joe touched on it, and I've got to agree with him, which has caused so much consternation that people have lost sight of what the actual goal is or what the goal could be with 4K. And I'm not saying that Joe is completely right, because there's a lot of things that Joe says that I don't agree with, but I think he's right on this one. It's been a bit of a sideshow, which again has caused delays and has added to the complexity of things, where they've written this specification, and basically the specification is too far ahead of where things should be, and people are worrying about things that are too far down the line, and I think they've taken their eye off the ball, I think.
Can't you include it in the specification, but as well as Rec 709, and not necessarily use it? I mean, that's what I understand will probably happen. Yeah,
well, what Joe's saying is that you could include everything in the same thing. The problem with Rec 2020 is it's too specific in terms of where the colour points hit, and because people see colour slightly differently, it's too accurate. It's too on the ball. You need some rounding in there.
Points on the edge of the curve, on the edge of the CIE chart, isn't it?
You need some curving in there. You need some way of having a little bit more basically spectrum space in terms of colour, and it doesn't do that, and it's too far, it's too wide. I mean, God, they're struggling to hit 709 at the minute with a lot of panels. How the hell are they ever going to get out to 2020? They can't do it.
I'd be happy if they could just get out to DCI, P3, which is what's used in the cinema.
Yeah. So his idea is that, yes, if anything, what it's highlighted is that we need better bit depth. We need better colour depth. We need to be able to hit what the production side are doing, so we can see what the production side are doing, and that's the way to do it. Is to have this all-in-one encompassing that takes everything in on board, and is backwards compatible as well. And it made sense, and obviously the industry's listening to him because he was there as part of Samsung's presentation. So be interested to see where he goes with that. But unlike what somebody was saying on the thread, no, I don't think Joe Kane's a god. I think he's a very clever man, and I think he knows his stuff. He's certainly better versed in that side of things than I'll ever be. But there are certain things where we disagree slightly. But I think he's right on this one.
I've got to be honest. At the moment, this to me has all the makings of being the SACD format for the video world.
It could very well be, Ed, but
I mean, two really, really, really important things need to happen at Christmas next year. There needs to be a proper body of material to buy. Maybe a couple of re-releases, but importantly some new stuff as well. And secondly, there needs to be a £200/250 player. It really doesn't matter if it's made out of the sort of plastic that milk tray chocolates come in. it just has to essentially get down to a price point where it just about has a point of mainstream access. If they fail on either of those counts, and essentially the stuff that's released is not necessarily of immediate interest to real people, and the only way they have to play it is a £1,000 product, it's just not going to work. They literally have one chance and one chance only for this. I don't mean to, I'm coming across as unnaturally pessimistic, but I'm looking at this from, well, I know, but I'm coming at this from a perspective of I've already watched my primary interest area, 2-channel audio, split and diverge, and it's abundantly clear that the convenience option is what the vast majority of people are going to go with.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's always been the case, Ed. I think this 4K it's always going to be a niche. The same as Blu-ray has always been a niche. It hasn't penetrated the market out there. I mean, I'll give you an example. My parents have an HDTV. I gave them a Blu-ray player, a multi-region Blu-ray player, some Blu-ray discs, and said, you can hire these and blah, blah, blah. Better quality, suits your... And every time I go up there, they're watching BBC One SD on the Sky HD system. My stepdad watches Sky Sports in SD. He doesn't realise that he's got the HD channels there. And they've never bought or hired or rented a Blu-ray disc. So... Yeah.
I mean, I think we've all discovered... I mean, even I have to admit this now, having discovered things like Netflix... that it is incredibly convenient, and for certain things I'm more than happy to watch it, and the quality is surprisingly good. We are entering over the next year. Imagine how much things are going to improve in the next year. In terms
well,
of
I get Infinity in a few weeks, Steve.
We've both seen, and as has Mark, we've seen Netflix 4K now. It's impressive in terms of what they're capable of doing, and we're going to talk about this again in a minute. But some of the streaming services are now adding Dolby Atmos. So you're talking about some fairly high-end, streaming capabilities here for over the internet. So December 2015 could be too late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be, or it could turn out to be quite a nice little niche product that.
Well, that's the dream, isn't it? A really high-quality niche product for 4K delivery. Because if you're talking about 4K projection, particularly, which is where 4K really comes into its own, the bigger the screen, the more impact it's going to have. The idea of a 4K Blu-ray disc would be the dream, obviously.
Do you think it was a little bit telling the way the news came out and how the industry actually feels about it, perhaps? I mean, because it just literally sneaked out, didn't it? By courtesy of an impromptu meeting with the BDA and some journalists hanging about on the floor, and then it just kind of leaked out. You would thought there was a bit more fanfare if the industry would really behind it.
I think possibly, and this was raised in the thread, and it made quite a bit of sense. Is that now that the cat out the bag, people might hold off buying stuff, buying product, and maybe certain manufacturers want to sell some 4K TVs before there's this system. So it might.
I guess the BDA is made up of so many companies and components that you can probably leave it to one manufacturer, but you'd think they would make a bit more of it than just sort of farting the news out.
Yeah. It
depends on who you ask too. I've asked pretty much every manufacturer what's going on with 4K Blu-ray. If you ask Sony, they say, well, it's coming, it's going to happen. They seem pretty positive about the whole idea. But Blu-ray's been a big Sony's big baby for a long time. They've invested a lot in it back in the days of the PS3. They obviously want to position themselves as the company when it comes to 4K. So they own a studio, so you can see them supporting it, whatever happens. We talked to Samsung, for example. Their view is we can do it. We don't think the studios are interested. We think they're much more interested in doing. They said exactly things you said, Phil. They said that Blu-ray hasn't been particularly successful, and they would rather just do it as deliver it over the internet via download or streaming. So different companies have different opinions. Obviously, as an enthusiast, even if it was as a very niche Laserdisc type marketplace, I would rather have the option to buy a 4K Blu-ray, ideally if it was available, than be just left with having to stream things.
In wrapping up, the only thing we haven't really discussed is Dolby Atmos, and that's because I'm quite shocked. No demonstrations whatsoever of Dolby Atmos on the show floor that I could find. I don't know about you, Steve, but I did have a look around and I couldn't see. Well, obviously I went to the obvious places to have a look, and so they didn't have any dems on or anything like that, which is quite surprising with the way that Dolby's promoting this at the moment. But also what I found quite surprising was speaking to other major manufacturers that we spoke to during the week, none of them launching Dolby Atmos stuff, which is quite interesting. Certainly the home theatre and boxes and that type of thing. A lot of these big companies that you would have thought would get on board with that didn't have any announcements whatsoever.
No, I mean, obviously up to now it's been all AV receiver manufacturers that are really supporting Atmos. Having said that, I know there are certainly all-in-one box systems, definitely by LG, for example, that have had upward firing speakers built in. So I can imagine it would be quite relatively straightforward for these manufacturers to adopt Atmos if they want to. Perhaps they're just waiting to see how it plays out in the marketplace in terms of the sort of the higher end AVR market before they start introducing into all-in-one systems. But it was sort of conspicuous by its absence, really, wasn't it, Atmos at the show, which was a shame. I know you wanted an opportunity to actually listen to it, but I guess it was. I don't know. Does IFA really cover the sort of that kind of the AVR world much?
It didn't help that Dolby had their thing off-site. You're talking about a showground the size of the Messe in Berlin, with new sections being built to make it even bigger. Yet Dolby's attitude has always been, well, we're going to do our thing off-site. And I'm sorry, but if I'm at the Messe, and I'm walking miles to get between manufacturers, the last thing I'm going to do is go to the hassle of trying to find a taxi to then travel 10-15 minutes to somewhere off-site, spend time with them, and then travel back again. I think that just didn't work. If they were wanting coverage, then that idea just doesn't work, and I don't know why they do that. I was disappointed. I didn't see and didn't get an opportunity to hear Atmos, because I've got lots of questions about it, like most people have. Is it going to succeed? At the moment, no, I don't think so. I don't think anybody's interested.
Well, it's interesting that they can deliver it over streaming services, so it's not just going to be tied to a Blu-ray. And going back to Ed's point about how much things can change in just a year, if you can talk about 4K streaming with Dolby Atmos. And when it comes to streaming, Dolby is still the predominant sound format. It's not like Blu-ray, where the majority of Blu-rays actually use DTS HD master audio, which are going to make it a bit tricky for Dolby to roll it out amongst, in terms of Blu-ray. I think they'll find it easier to roll it out amongst streaming service providers.
Yeah, I mean, that's all very well, but the big Achilles heel with this problem, this system, is adding more speakers into a system, and that is where it's going to fail.
Yeah, I think they're placing a lot of their sort of hopes and emphasis on upward firing speakers. where you put them on top of speakers that are already there, basically. And that's going to be their hope, their sort of big hope in terms of selling it to mass market. Because you're right, no one's going to start drilling into the ceiling and sticking speakers up on their ceiling unless it's a dedicated install.
So they can have it with all the streaming services they like, and on Blu-ray, which has been announced today that the first Blu-ray is coming out September in the US, November in the UK, and it's Transformers. Great, but what's your market for this? Who's actually going to buy these systems? Who's going to actually set them up? Again, I think you're looking at a niche.
I think definitely. I mean, I think AVRs generally and multi-channel systems are pretty much niche at the moment. People are going for sound bars and more simpler and more convenient solutions. But I think amongst the enthusiast, which hopefully is most people listening to this podcast, I think it's good news, and it's not a massive surprise that it's Transformers. It's the most successful film of the year so far worldwide. It's a Paramount production. Paramount use Dolby True HD on their discs as opposed to Dolby Master.
But it's a total piece of shit movie, Stephen.
Oh yeah, I know. I mean, the fact I'm gonna have to buy this on Blu-ray now is really galling. But I mean, it will sound great if nothing else.
Well,
there's good news because Warner Brothers are also supporting Dolby Atmos, and hopefully that means they'll reissue Gravity with an Atmos soundtrack, and that's something I would like to get. So we'll see. We'll see.
So they've got at least one sale. Rolling. They've got at least one sale for Gravity. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, the one person that is set up for Dolby Atmos can have the final word on it. Ed?
Well, I don't know. It does disappoint me that literally the first film announced for Dolby Atmos is something which has been pretty much universally panned by critics and has done extremely well, mainly because of its sales in China, in cinema terms. And it's just, I don't know. I just wish that it perhaps had been something. I don't know. We had a clutch of action films over the summer. I was just hoping it wasn't going to be that one.
Well,
I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm being entirely harsh. I haven't gone to see it, but nobody came out of it going, that was a much underrated film with some really subtle plot elements. So
it's an awful film, Ed. Don't get me wrong. It's awful. I think it's just unfortunately timing, because Godzilla would have been a good choice with a great Dolby Atmos soundtrack, but that's already come out on disc now. I guess it's just the fact that it's convenient timing in terms of this tying in with the release.
What studio is Guardians of the Galaxy? I know this is a stupid thing for me to say.
That's Marvel. It's Disney.
Right, so they're not a natural user
I think
of it.
Disney. I mean, most of the
it
studios,
had an Atmos logo in the credits, but they don't.
So Disney, Fox, Warner's, and Paramount have all been quite strong supporters of Atmos. Right. So you can expect all those studios at some point to. So, for example, when I went to do Deluxe with Dolby for the demonstration how they create the digital cinema packages. That was a Fox movie they were using as an example. X-Men: Days of Futures Past, which had an Atmos soundtrack. So there's plenty of films available if the studios in question are prepared to put out discs using Dolby True HD. Now the thing is that every single Fox disc I've ever seen uses a DTS Master Audio soundtrack. Warner's a bit more agnostic, but mostly DTS. Disney, again, I think almost entirely DTS. So it's going to be a question of whether the studios are prepared to put out discs, re-release discs, or do new discs with Dolby True HD soundtracks, having built up a big, strong relationship with DTS. Don't know.
I mean, because it must be said, Guardians would be a worthy Atmos release. It's going to be a big thing anyway, but the way that, let's face it, it's got a lot of space involved in it. It's a natural candidate. That would have been, I mean, okay, it's a bit further down the release schedule than Transformers is, but that would have been my go-to. Got to be honest.
Okay, well, we'll see what the 6 people listening to this podcast think of that, and whether the 6 of them will be able to put up the extra speakers that are required. Who knows?
You don't have high hopes for this one, do you? Don't worry, normal serve. I'm sure that once we've got all these stuff out of the way,
I just do not see it working. It's just one of these things where I'm thinking, well, having seen the real world and having been in lots and lots and lots of houses and lots and lots and lots of living rooms of Joe Public, I just do not see it happening. And even those with a slight interest in cinema sound at home and all the rest, I just don't see it. I just do not see it taking off. It'll be, again, another niche, but I think a smaller niche again than what 4K Blu-ray would be, because I know a lot of enthusiasts, they take into account what their partners think of the living room as well, and wouldn't dare suggest or putting extra speakers in the room. So that's the one thing that's going to kill it for me. Anyway, we've run out of time. We need to move on. There has been no games news on the podcast tonight. That's because there is a games podcast on the way. It will arrive on the 14th of this month, so look out for that if gaming is your thing. And there are movies out next week on Blu-ray. Pompeii, Sabotage, Only Lovers Left Alive, Frank, The Two Faces of January. Those are out. We don't have time to go through them, unfortunately. So which one would you pick from that list?
Well, I really enjoyed Pompeii. It's a great 3D disc, so I go for that personally. I mean, I'm not saying it's a masterpiece of a film. Only Lovers Left Alive looks like a much more interesting film, and I know Frank's had really good reviews. But for the AV enthusiast out there who wants good picture and sound and nice 3D effects, get Pompeii.
Okay, so that is IFA. That's what we thought of IFA. That's what we saw. There is lots of content yet to appear on the homepage, so keep your eyes open for that, like the Q&A sessions with the Samsung executive, Mr. Kim, plus the two gentlemen from Panasonic's TV unit discussing the future and where they see things going, as well as video content. Lots still to go up, and I guess the podcast will get back to its usual next week. We've been too much on message. I've got a headache.
Yeah, I don't know. I come out of this feeling dirty. So yeah, we'll find something to just prattle on about in true form next week, I imagine.
Yeah, we're all away for cold showers because we feel dirty. So that's it. Thanks very much for listening. My thanks to Steve Withers.
Out of the door, line on the left, one across each.
And Ed Selley.
What Jesus fails to appreciate, it's the meek who are the problem.
Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Bookmark AVForums for the latest reviews, news and video. And you can also rate us on iTunes. So go and give us a 5-star rating, please. I think it's out of 5, so that'll do.
Please.
If it's 10, then give us 10. I'm Phil, and thanks very much for listening. And we will see you again. Normal service resumed next Wednesday.